UCLA, Dr. Elizabeth Lageson, on the peers curriculum. And so today I'm going to talk to you guys about two different versions of peers. The first being the teen or school-based version, as well as the young adult curriculum. They're very similar, but we will talk a little bit about the differences between the two, and then talk about different ways that you either can bring it to the families that you work with, or for those of you who work with school districts, we also do trainings for school personnel, as well as we'll facilitate with students in a school district. So I'd be happy to answer questions about that opportunity as well. So we can go ahead and get started. So Ashley, if you wouldn't mind sharing the PowerPoint, we can begin. All right. So PEER stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills, and it is an evidence-based practice for teens and young adults with autism as well as other disabilities, but it is not required to have any sort of diagnosis to participate, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. But if you want to go to the next slide for me, Ashley. So what is PEERS? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both curriculums. So PEERS, as I said, is an evidence-based social skills intervention. Both programs are 16 sessions long. Sometimes that can mean that it is 16 weeks long, but you do have the ability to design how you're going to deliver it. So for example, this summer, we're doing it in 8 weeks, meaning we offer 2 sessions per week. We're still covering all 16 lessons, but you have the ability to sort of design the way that it's facilitated to meet your individual schedules and what works best for you feasibly. So the most important thing to know about peers is that regardless of the age of the participant, they need to be socially motivated to participate. And what that means is that they want to learn the skills that are going to be covered during the curriculum. So one of the things that often happens, especially when we're working with teens or adolescents, is their teachers or their parents will say, oh, this person definitely needs this. Like they 100% need this, they would be great, they are the perfect candidate. However, when I do an intake interview with that young person, they're like, I'm good, I got enough friends, I don't need any new ones, I don't really want to learn this stuff, I'm not interested. So the number one thing that we look for when we're talking to teens and young adults during their intake interview is whether or not they're interested in learning the skills that we cover or learning how to make new relationships. It might be that that person really could benefit from that content, but they're just not ready at that time. And so it might be something they come back to later on. But we want to make sure they're socially motivated, because not only does that impact their personal success in the program, it will also impact the success of the other members, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and confident within the group environment. The primary purpose of the teen curriculum is learning how to make and keep new friends. So we will focus pretty exclusively on building those friend relationships, as well as talk about some other topics that I'll mention in a second. However, for the young adults, we sort of focus on 2 different types of relationships. We will talk about how do you make and keep friends, but also talk about information regarding dating. So how do you find a potential romantic partner? How do you understand how to ask that person on a date? What do you do on a date? What is socially appropriate to do when you're dating a new individual? As well as talk about some other topics as well. But the one thing I really want everyone to know is that it is designed to be delivered in its entirety. So this program is meant to have all 16 lessons covered, and the curriculum builds upon itself, meaning that the order that it's presented in is designed for a very specific purpose. So you don't necessarily want to bounce around, you don't want to pick and choose, you want to start at session 1 and move forward. And when I show you guys the actual breakdown of both curriculums, I'll be able to sort of explain why that's more important than some people might typically believe. So Ashley, if you want to go on to the next slide for me. So Peers was initially designed at University of California, Los Angeles, as I said, by Dr. Elizabeth Lageson. And when she designed it, it was initially for young adults with autism spectrum disorder. So that's who it's been most extensively tested with. However, it's also been tested and shown effective for teens with intellectual disabilities, teens with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, as well as teens with ADD and ADHD. It's also been shown to be effective with both teens and young adults who are currently experiencing depression, anxiety, or other forms of social challenges. As I said, though, it is by no means required to have a diagnosis to participate. We've had individuals who just are struggling to build those relationships and want to figure out how to feel more comfortable socially, and they've been very successful in the group. So if you have individuals that you work with who do not have any sort of diagnosis but are really motivated to learn these skills, they are a perfect candidate to participate. So that's just something I want to make sure is reinforced, that you by no means have to have a diagnosis to participate, though it historically was designed for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. So we will move on to our next slide. So this is what's called the curriculum for school-based professionals, meaning that this is the version that is delivered within a school environment, and it is for teens and adolescents. It's for 14 to 17-year-olds is typically the age group that is covered, meaning middle and high school students. The information will start out with teaching them how do you trade information with another person. So the first 7 weeks of the curriculum really focus on basic conversational skills. How do you trade information? How do you start and exit conversations? How do you communicate in a two-way conversation? What does it mean to communicate electronically with another individual? And then we will also talk about how do you find a good source of friends and how do you use humor appropriately. So those first 7 weeks are really building that foundation. After the first 7 weeks, we're going to transition into some more abstract concepts. So the reason that we want to make sure we do it in the order that it's provided is that everything builds upon itself. So a really good example of this is, why would we start off with having a two-way conversation before we teach you how to enter or exit? Well, if I were to go teach you how to enter a conversation, you might know all the steps for how do you initiate, how do you walk up to another person, but then once you've done that, where do you go from there? How do you continue? And it just sort of stops. So what we focus on first is that ability to go back and forth. Trade information about yourself, answer and ask questions about yourself. Once we feel that the individuals are comfortable with that skill, then we talk about, all right, how would you start a conversation that would then transfer into you trading information with that individual? And then once you've been trading information with that individual, how do you exit that conversation or end that conversation? So that's an example of why the curriculum is designed the way it is. Once we feel that the first 7 lessons have been implemented with fidelity and that the participants feel comfortable with that skill set, we move into, as I said, the more abstract lessons, such as handling an argument, changing your reputation, handling any sort of embarrassing feedback or bullying. And the one that a lot of them are interested in is how you minimize rumors and gossip. So for individuals that participate in the group, some of them might have experienced these things already. They might have unfortunately been bullied or are currently being bullied. So we want to help them better understand how can they handle that situation or be able to kind of bounce back from it. But we also want to prepare individuals for, if you were to find yourself in this situation, what could you do to make that situation less harmful for you, and how can we make it where it doesn't last nearly as long? What are the steps that you can do that will likely result in the bully kind of stopping that behavior, and therefore it's not something that's going to be an ongoing problem in your life? So this is the teen curriculum. It can be either done in a school environment, or we at CLD actually will do team-based groups with 14 to 17-year-olds using this version of the curriculum. So before I move on to the young adult curriculum, does anyone have any questions for me? All right, I'm going to take that as a no. So we can move on to the next one, Ashley. So this is the young adult curriculum. They are very similar in content. So as you can see, the first 7 lessons are almost identical. The biggest difference, as I said, is regarding dating. So there are 4 lessons on dating etiquette. So the first is, how do you let someone know that you're interested or that you like them? How do you ask someone on a date? How do you go on a date? And then lastly, what are some important dating do's and don'ts? So these are sort of the social etiquette of understanding what should you do when you're in a relationship with someone versus what should you not do when you're in a relationship with someone. Just like we said for the teen curriculum, this is meant to be done in the order that it's presented. So you will move from those more concrete foundational skills regarding basic conversations and moving into those more abstract or those more complex topics. One of the things that's really important for both curriculums is to have what are referred to as social coaches. So social coaches are individuals that are part of that person's life who are going to reinforce the content outside of the group environment. So for the teens, this often is teachers or parents. And then for young adults, it's often a caregiver or a parent as well. So when I say reinforce the content outside of group, what I mean by that is, so if I was working with a teenager, for example, and let's say that Doreen was that teenager's parent, I would want to make sure that she was aware of what we were doing during each lesson so that she can utilize the buzzwords that we're discussing to reinforce what's happening and to be able to generalize this curriculum to different settings in that person's life. So if we've been talking about trading information, and one of our buzzwords is don't be a conversation hog, meaning that you want to make sure both people are participating in that conversation. You want to make sure that no one is kind of dominating the conversation or taking over so the other person can't speak. That would be our kind of our prompt. Don't be a conversation hog. So if Doreen is, engaging in a conversation with her teenager and she realizes that that's something that he's doing, she might say, now remember, don't be a conversation hog. Because we want to make sure these skills are being reinforced outside of the group so that people understand, oh, this is not something that's just supposed to be done in this one setting, but these are skills that I can utilize across setting, whether it's at school, in the community, or in the workplace. And so that's one of the things that we really talk about, the importance of having other people in that person's life that can help reinforce this content besides the people that are facilitating the group that he or she is participating in. Do you guys have any questions about that?
I have Amanda. Would siblings make a good social coach or not? I guess it obviously depends on the sibling, but.
So it depends on the age. So okay. I would say, I would never suggest a sibling for a young adult. So if you were working with a 21-year-old, asking a 16-year-old sibling to be a social coach might be disrespectful and come across the wrong way. But if I'm working with a 14-year-old and that they have a 17-year-old sibling, and that 17-year-old sibling has a really close relationship with that person, then yes, they might be a good fit. So it's really going to be based off the age of the individuals and the nature of their relationship, because we want to make sure that the social coach is providing feedback and make sure that they know that feedback should be on a behavior and not a person. And so sometimes that can be difficult for teenagers to do, because they're going to be like, oh, why did you do that? And that makes it feel really personal. So we want to make sure that the individual that's serving as a social coach is able to talk about a behavior and what they observed and not make the person feel like it's a reflection of who they are. So it would really be a case-by-case basis about whether or not you feel another teen or young adult's a good fit.
Okay,
that's a great question.
How much training does that social coach need?
So again, that's going to depend. So one of the things that are provided for each lesson is a handout. So for the teen handout, we refer to them as parent handouts. So each week that person will have a kind of an outline of what goes on during the lesson with all of the buzzwords that are used to help them reinforce that. And then for the young adults, we refer to that as a social coach handout. One of the things that we at CLD have started to implement is parent orientations, where we go over not only what the curriculum is going to entail, but we talk about how to appropriately provide feedback, because we know that that's something that a lot of people struggle with. There are different ways that the curriculum can be administered. So for the young adult curriculum, sometimes people will do it where at the same time that the young adults are going through the curriculum, their parents or their social coaches are also being trained simultaneously. So that way it's a more fluid kind of group between the two of them. They're both learning the same material. They can utilize it and talk about it really candidly, but that's not required. But so if you're doing a group that's not going to have that parent component being trained simultaneously, I would say you need to, at minimum, do some sort of parent orientation so that they understand this information. And then, Rhonda, you said you worked for a GLRS, correct?
Yes.
So one of the things that's really important is then the teachers that are selected to facilitate the curriculum need to have either a really good relationship with the students that are part of that group, or they need to have some sort of clinical training. So they understand, how do you deliver information to another individual? How do you provide feedback? And how do you have those conversations in a way that, again, is reflecting the behavior, not the individual? And so that would be the way that we would talk about it. So when we train schools or when we talk to school personnel, we really want them to pick individuals that sort of have a clinical background, because their skill set will allow that information to come out in a more authentic way. And again, focus on the behavior, not the person.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
No problem. Jamie, I saw at one point that you had unmuted yourself. Did you have a question as well?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure before I moved on. All right.
I actually have a question. If you
Sure,
don't.
Dana.
So as you were speaking, I was just thinking about, has this ever been implemented in a school setting with like neurotypical peers that have been also trained in to be those social coaches and that kind of thing? And have you seen that work well or not work?
So we get that question a lot. We personally have not done that. We have piloted it at a school that has students with learning disabilities, autism, and then their neurotypical peers, but we didn't put them in the group together. And the reason that we didn't do that is, just like any time that you're in a group environment, you want to allow for confidentiality. And so we weren't sure how comfortable the students would feel with their peers knowing, oh, well, Molly has to go be part of the peers group. That's because she's not good at this. And so, there were some concerns about how that might be received. One thing that we have talked about, though, is, so let's say that you're at a school that maybe is like 6th through 12th grade. Maybe you could have some upperclassmen who are, juniors or seniors that are really comfortable with social skills. They're really empathetic. They might be able to serve as social coaches for middle schoolers. So that might be as an option, but we typically would avoid having people that are the same age serve as a social coach for their peers, just because we do want to make sure confidentiality is respected, and we don't want to place any of the students in a situation where they feel like they're being called out for something that they're less than comfortable with. So I do think there have been schools that have tried it, but there's not, to our knowledge, a lot of literature about it quite yet.
Okay.
But it is a question we get asked a lot. Doreen, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, since you two have done this in a school environment?
I missed the original question. I was kind of in and out. What was the original question?
About training neurotypical peers as social coaches.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's as long as that that peer is just understanding and not going to use, anything against that particular student. But I think it's a good idea to have some peer coaches that are willing to do it and able to do it as well.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person and the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And that also applies for social coaches that are adults. Like, there are some adults that are just not a good fit as a social coach. And so we've, had to think about that when we've worked with people as well, is how do we make sure that the individuals that we're going to have as social coaches are able to be empathetic, they're able to provide quality feedback, they're able to build rapport quickly with young adults or teenagers, but then lastly, that they're individuals that they themselves model pro-social behavior. And one thing that I know I can say for myself is after doing this for like 2 years, my social skills have definitely improved over the time that I participated. Like there were things that I didn't realize I did, or there were things that I had no idea were problematic until someone kind of wrote them down and pointed them out for me. So I would say that we want to make sure that the people that we're using as models engage in pro-social behaviors, but then also that we ourselves acknowledge like, hey, I don't do this right 100% of the time. I think acknowledging that and acknowledging that anxiety is a huge factor into our behavior is something that's really important because it lessens the need for perfection. And I think that's what a lot of our young adults specifically are concerned about is like, oh, if I do this wrong, someone's going to laugh at me. And we want to make sure that that is never sort of the atmosphere that is created in a group environment.
And also to piggyback off of that, you want to make sure too that the person receiving the training is open to having a peer as a social coach rather than having an adult. They may have themselves a preference for one or the other. So making sure that we're taking that into consideration as well. And as Molly said, too, I know after reviewing some of these steps and rules and everything with the different topics listed here, I know that I started to change my social skill behavior based on that. So we're not looking for someone that's perfect as a social coach. It's just really being willing to understand that they may have to make modifications of how they do things as well, and being open to that.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you, Dana. So we will move on to our next question, or next slide, excuse me. All right, so peers is sort of divided up into 3 major parts. So the first is that there are homework assignments. And these homework assignments are related to the skills that you've previously learned. So we're constantly practicing what we have previously done. Then there is a didactic lesson, meaning that's the instruction related to the social skills. And then there are behavioral rehearsals. So that's a chance to actually practice the skill in real time. So the didactic lesson, which is where we actually teach the social skill or the steps, has sort of 3 components. The first being that we utilize the Socratic method. And what that means is that instead of me getting up in front of a room and lecturing and saying, this is how you do this, we will engage the participants in sort of hypothetical situations or ask them questions where they will actually work together to develop what we call buzzwords. So a buzzword is a language that both the facilitators, the participants, and the social coaches all use to describe specific skills or describe specific behaviors. So if we were talking, and so if I was the facilitator and you guys were my group, I might say, what is one of the things that might happen if you're having a conversation with someone and that person is talking nonstop? They're not letting you talk. They're just continually speaking at you and they're just not letting you get a word in. What might you guys say if I ask you that question? Yes, Rhonda. Oh, I thought you were unmuting yourself. So they might say something along the lines of, oh, that's really annoying, or I hate when people do that and they never let me get a word in and it's really rude, or I just feel like that person only cares about themselves. So those might be some things that the group talks about. And I was like, well, what would you describe that person as? And they might say like someone that talks too much. And I was like, okay, so someone that talks too much might be a conversation hog. So one of our buzzwords would be, don't be a conversation hog. And so that would be something that they would remember of like, okay, when I'm having a conversation, we have to trade information about 50% of the time I'm talking, 50% of the time I'm listening. So that's an example of a buzzword. Another one that everyone seems to enjoy, don't be a conversation hog, is like everyone's favorite one to say because I just think it's funny. But a really common other one that people like is don't be an interviewer. So an interviewer is someone that asks a ton of questions, but they never answer those questions, and therefore the other person doesn't get to know very much about you. Like I might learn a ton about Jamie because I'm asking him question after question after question, but Jamie's not learning anything about me if I'm not sharing information about myself. So I would be reminded like, Molly, remember, don't be an interviewer. So the buzzwords are a common language that all the individuals who are associated with peers can utilize as a way to prompt an individual to utilize the skills that we're talking about. And the way we do that, as I said, is by using the Socratic method. This way that the participants feel they're creating the answers and creating the curriculum as we move through it, instead of me telling them what to do. It's this sense of ownership, and when people feel they have ownership over the curriculum, they're more likely to participate, more likely to be engaged, and it's going to be something that they remember more easily. We also utilize a ton of role plays and videos. So UCLA provided a huge bank of videos that are associated with each lesson within the peers curriculum. And so the videos are about 30 to 45 seconds long each. They're very brief, and there's a good version and a bad version for pretty much every single skill. And so what we'll do is the first one we'll watch will be sort of the inappropriate or the bad example, is the way that the peers team labels it. I don't personally like calling it that. I would say more of the inappropriate version. And so we'll watch it and we'll ask the group 3 questions. These 3 questions are called perspective taking questions, and they're used when you watch both the inappropriate and the appropriate version of the video. And we ask, what was that like for the other person? So if the girl on your slide that's wearing the black shirt, her name is Elena. Elena is the person in every video that does the wrong thing. So we'll say, what was that like for the other person? And they'll say, oh, I think they seemed uncomfortable. They obviously wanted that conversation to end. They didn't want to be talking to her. We might then ask, well, what do you think they thought of Elena based off of her behavior? And they'll describe what they saw, or they describe how they would feel if they were talking to someone that engaged in that behavior. And then lastly, we'll say, do you think that the group would want to talk to her again? And that the purpose of those types of questions is to help them think about how the other person feels. So we want to help them understand, oh, that's why when I've done that in the past, someone might have reacted the way they did. We want them to be able to step outside themselves and take an additional person's perspective. There are times where I'm going to talk about the younger people we work with, so like a 14-year-old, for example. Sometimes the individuals might be what's called egocentric, where they have a hard time thinking outside of themselves. They think very much about their own life and how they're interacting. And so it's helpful for them to understand how their behavior can impact others and how their behavior could require someone to say, I don't know if I want to be friends with this individual based off what he or she is doing. So we want them to be able to take the other person's perspective and be able to say, oh, I now understand why someone might respond to me that way. And so again, we will ask those same questions both after an appropriate and an inappropriate version of a video. After we've gone over all of the steps or all of the skills for that specific lesson, we will do a behavioral rehearsal, which is allowing them to practice those new skills. So we will put them in pairs or in small groups and then assign one of the facilitators to each group, and we allow them to practice in a natural setting. So it might be that we say, all right, guys, we're going to practice trading information. What would you like? I might say, Ashley, you are going to talk to Tammy. So what would you want to talk to her about? And then they would start to practice and they would start to utilize the skills that we talked about, and the facilitator as needed would provide feedback. So we also sometimes will do what are called activities, where we'll do something like Jeopardy, where they're asking each other questions like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite TV show? And to them, they think they're just playing a game, and it's just an opportunity to play Jeopardy and gain points and kind of do a fun activity. But it's actually also a really good way for them to get to know each other better and forces them to ask each other questions about their likes and dislikes. Because that's one of the things that we focus on is when you are having a conversation with another person, we want you to find out, do you have a common interest? Because a common interest is then what you would talk about again in the future. It's what friendships are often based around, and it's something that you could do with that person if you realize that you both enjoy the same thing. So by having them practice trading information and talking about their likes and dislikes, determining their common interest, that's something that they can decide, okay, well, I realize that me and Ashley both like the same movies. So when I talk to her again in the future, that's something I could bring up. And so we really want them to have a chance to practice with everyone in the group. So we will constantly be changing the pairings, constantly changing the groupings to allow them to get to know as many people and practice with as many people as possible. But that opportunity to practice is a key part of the lesson. Just teaching them the skills is not going to cause behavior change. You want to give them the chance to practice, receive feedback, and then repeat. And we're going to keep doing that until we feel that the person has mastered that skill. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so we will move on to our next slide. So these are the things that you can sort of expect to happen as a result of the peers curriculum. So it's going to help teens and young adults develop and maintain friendships. It's going to help young adults potentially find romantic partners and develop a romantic relationship if that's something that they're interested in. It's going to help them handle conflict and peer rejection. It will teach what are called ecologically valid social skills. So ecologically valid means these are the skills that people who are considered socially successful engage in, and they typically tend to be the social skills that are appropriate across cultures. Obviously, there are small nuances to that and small things that might change, but typically the skills that are taught are the ones that are seen to be socially successful across culture. We also, again, will help them find a source of friends. So we'll talk about different places that someone might find a friendship. So if it's at school, what are some different clubs that you could participate in? What are sports that you could participate in if that's an interest? What are some community opportunities that you could join? For young adults, we'll talk about meetup groups. But what are different ways that you could find people that have common interests to you? And with those common interests, that could help you develop develop a friendship with that individual. And then again, for young adults, we'll talk about what are ways to potentially find a romantic partner if that's something that's important to you. They'll receive support through social coaching. And then the main goal is obviously to help them become more independent with their social relationships. When we look at the evidence and sort of the results of peers, so peers has been tested in what are called randomized control trials, meaning that one group received the intervention, one group did not, and then they compared the outcomes. One of the things that is most important to us is that the individuals who go through peers report that they do not feel, that's important, they do not feel nearly as socially isolated or lonely. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that the individuals feel connected to others, connected in their community, and they're feeling a sense of, you know, self-worth, efficacy, connection. So the idea that their social and emotional isolation or their social and emotional loneliness decreases is one of the things that's most important to us, and it's one of the things that results in people wanting to participate. That's usually what the social motivation is they say, I want more friends, I want people that I can spend time with, I want people to hang out with. And so that's one of the things that we really look for when we do those interviews is this person motivated to make new relationships? And if they're not, then it's just not going to be a good fit for them at that time. So that's really what you expect to get from peers. I also want to make sure that everyone knows that peers is not a support group. So it's not a group for individuals who are experiencing any sort of like mental health condition. We're not going to be doing any sort of processing of emotions. The idea is that we're providing skill sets, so it's psychoeducational. It's also not going to, be able to solve every problem that a person might be experiencing, but we really do want to focus on building those relationships. The other thing that's very important, and this is the case for anytime you're doing a group-based intervention, is that while the purpose of the group is to make and keep friends, peers is not what's called a friendship matching group, meaning that we do not want the participants to become friends with each other. We want them to become friends with people outside of the group. So it might be that Jareen and I are in the same group and we realize that we have a ton in common and we want to hang out with each other. That's fine, but that's not allowed to happen until the group is finished. And the reason is if we're starting to hang out with each other during group, let's say we get into a fight with each other, that's going to impact either one or both of us not wanting to continue to participate. It's going to change the overall dynamic of the group. It just might make things incredibly awkward for everyone involved. It can impact confidentiality. So it might be that some of the individuals end up being great candidates for friendship for one another, but we want them to wait to do that after the group is over. So it is not designed as a friendship matching group. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them build those skills so that they can then incorporate and utilize them once the group is over with the other people in their lives. So that's just something to kind of make sure you remember, is they're not meant to hang out with each other while the 16 sessions are taking place. All right, so I kind of want to talk to you guys briefly about how peers could be available to the families that you work with. So Ashley, I'll let you go to the next slide. So at the Center for Leadership and Disability, we offer peers in 3 different ways. So the first is we offer team groups. We offer them either in person or virtually. So as a result of COVID-19 and social distancing, we've been offering them through Zoom. And it's actually worked out really well. Ironically, several of the people that we just completed a group with said they liked it more than being in person, because there's sort of a certain level of safety that exists by being behind a screen. So they don't have to worry as much about like, how far away am I from the other person? Am I too close, or am I making eye contact correctly? Some of those things that they might worry about are less noticeable in a virtual setting. But the way that we offer the group virtually would still be the same that we would do in person. So like what we're doing right now, we would start out in the main room like Doreen had us when we first came into this, and then we would break into breakout rooms for those behavioral rehearsals to still get that small group practice or to get practice in pairs. And then we would come back together in the large group at the end for kind of a recap and for, and for our homework. So we still get the opportunity to get one-on-one feedback, and we still get a chance to participate through behavioral rehearsals. For team groups, they cost $500 per person. If the family has family support funds, we have been able to be a vendor with several agencies where families can utilize that resource. We also offer young adult groups. So young adult groups are for 18 to 26-year-olds, and those again can be offered either virtually or in person. Everything that we're doing this summer is going to be done virtually, because we just want to make sure that we're being cognizant of social distancing and making sure that everyone is safe. And the young adult group costs $750 per person. And then we do something called individual peers sessions, or peers personal sessions. And these are for individuals who maybe are not ready for a group environment yet, or maybe their communication skills would not allow them to be successful in a group environment. And we've been doing these one-on-one. So we will do the curriculum individually with that person. So if I'm doing, let's say, a peers one-on-one session with Joe, he and I would go over the curriculum lesson by lesson, and then I would bring in some of my other peer certified colleagues to serve as a communication partner or a practice partner. So like I'm going to use Doreen because she and I did this last week, where I've been working with this 17-year-old for the last couple of weeks. He and I are getting to the point where he's having fluid conversations with me. It's really natural. He's getting much more comfortable. So I asked Doreen to come in and join like the last 20 minutes of our session so that he can practice with a new person. So they're still getting an opportunity to practice with different people. It just might be that they feel more comfortable in a one-on-one environment versus a large group environment. Those are done only with individuals that are considered peer certified, meaning that you have to be trained by UCLA. That's one of our requirements at CLD, and those are $75 per session. So those are 3 different ways that we can work with a community environment. But then, as I said, we do staff trainings, meaning that we will train school personnel on how to facilitate the curriculum so they can bring it back to their districts. And we also will actually contract with school districts if it's in sort of the metro Atlanta area, where we would go and facilitate the curriculum for a semester once a week, for example. So those are other options that are available. If that's something that you are interested in and you work for a school district or work for a GLRS or work for a RESA, we'd be happy to talk with you about contracting to schedule a training for people from a certain district or people from an area. And in addition to training them on how to facilitate, we provide ongoing technical assistance as part of that contract, so that as they begin to facilitate on their own, if they have questions or they're not really sure how to handle a certain scenario, they can reach out to us, and we're happy to provide that ongoing support. Because that's one of the things that we realize is really helpful, is having other people to call upon that have already done this, be able to process what's going on and process how we can best support the individuals that we're working with. So that's everything that I sort of had prepared for you guys. Now I just want to open it up to questions. Does anyone have any sort of specific questions about either the teen or young adult curriculum? Or if you have sort of individual personal questions, I'm happy to hang around for a couple extra minutes and answer those as well. But that's what PEERS is. As I said, it stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills. And it's just a program that we feel really meets a lot of the needs of people in Georgia. So how can we help people build relationships? How can we help people begin to feel more connected to their communities? All right, so do you guys have any questions for me?
Yes, all sessions are 1 hour per week.
So when we, sure,
yes.
So when we do individual sessions, we do it for an hour at a time. But when we do it in a group environment, we do it for 2 hours per session, because that gives us more time, especially when there's more individuals. It's going to take a little bit longer to get through the behavioral rehearsal. So we allot 2 hours per session when we do it in a group environment.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is that a session is one engagement per week.
Yes, so
okay.
Typically if we do it over the course of 16 weeks, we'll meet once per week. For our summer groups, we are doing it over an 8-week session, so we meet twice per week.
Gotcha.
Have you guys ever tried it with the older adults? Because there's been some older adults past those age groups are being diagnosed with autism.
So we have not had a group for individuals that are older than 26 at this time. However, I've incorporated some of the lessons into other programs that I run. And so, as you said, it is helpful, but we just haven't done it with a group of individuals older than 26 at this point. But it's definitely something that we're thinking about as we move forward with it. It's a great question. Does anyone else have any?
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said earlier that they had some field testing with the ID students. Was it with higher incident students, higher cognitive function, or would it be appropriate? I get questions sometimes from our moderate teachers about something that will help them teach appropriate skills to their kids. Would this be too high level for, say, a moderate level?
So it's going to depend. So what we would suggest is the number one thing you want to look for is their ability to engage in two-way conversation. So the people need to be conversational. So when we work with or interview a teen, for example, I want to make sure that they're able to have a conversation. So it's going to be really hard if that individual has mainly communicates through gestures or mainly communicates in small phrases, or even someone that engages in significant echolalia can be difficult. So you want to make sure the individuals are conversational. The other thing that of our individual sessions is the pacing. So it might be that instead of 16 sessions, you're going to do it over the course of the whole year. And so you might spend 3 or 4 weeks on one lesson because you want to allow for that repetition. And it also might be that you realize that there are certain parts of a lesson that are just not as relevant. You might not need to focus on changing your reputation, and you just really want to focus on those first 7 lessons and really helping them with that conversational skill.
Right, but it wouldn't really require them to have to be able to read a lot of print, because that's where our kids sometimes have, they can communicate, but I can't read a script and I can't do, and so that's for our lower population. They can do a lot of the social, but not appropriate. And not everything, but a lot that we look at requires them to be able to read and follow a script and things like that.
So, and Doreen, feel free to jump into this part of the conversation. So when we do a group, they never receive any sort of paper materials. Everything we do is us facilitating using the manual, and then we're watching either in-person role plays or video role plays. The only handouts that are provided to the social coaches so that they know what was learned so that they can reinforce. But the actual participants themselves never have to write or read anything other than the pre and post assessments that we offer. And
Great.
those can be actually read to them,
Right.
and they be filled out that way. But yeah, there are no sort of materials required that require any sort of ability to read or write.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. That was a great question.
Do they practice the skills, you know, like your different skills? I mean, on a just sharing with each other, or do you have like a skills card? Or because that's what I'm accustomed to, and I mean, I just didn't know if that was a way to help teach those skills where they can see them in steps. I mean, are they in steps, or
Yeah. So
I'm just curious.
So let's say that we are going over the steps for joining a conversation. So we're going to facilitate the conversation, and with every buzzword that we create, we're going to write those either on a whiteboard or write them on a piece of chart paper. And so that
I like the
would be,
buzzwords.
yeah, so that would be like their prompt. So it's not required by any means to have to be able to read or write, but it is sort of a visual prompt that some of the kids could be able to go back and reference. So if Doreen and I are working with a group and we're realizing that, okay, every time we go over how to exit a conversation, they forget to say, I'll talk to you later. We'll say, all right, remember, step 5 is we need to say, I'll talk to you later before we immediately say goodbye. So there are visual prompts that we create, but again, it is not required to be able to read or write as long as the individuals are conversational. But it is something that's helpful to just have a visual prompt.
You can modify it, or include any sort of teaching methods that you feel like would be helpful for your students, or for the individuals in the class. So like, even if the buzzwords are written out in words, you can start to incorporate some sort of visual picture that is associated with each word as well. So you can definitely modify it in a way that makes it the best way for your students to learn and engage with the information as needed.
Yeah, because I'm way old school. I mean, we're back in PECs, and I mean, way before a lot of. I mean, that was the only way to communicate with, a very low functioning autistic child was through PECs, and that sort of thing. And behavior and teaching behavior skills as well as social skills was sometimes really hard. And that's why I'm a real advocate for role play. I really like that. And,
yeah. And I saw your comment in the chat as well. And I was saying, and Molly touched on this, that there are behavioral rehearsals associated with each lesson as well. So we ensure that we are practicing role playing and giving that feedback, because the feedback is also very important as well for them to maintain, learn and maintain those skills over time.
Yeah. So I see that there's also 2 questions in the chat box that I want to make sure we highlight before we go. So the first was about what topics are covered in the individual curriculum when we're working with individuals. It's the same curriculum that we would use for both teens or young adults. So depending on the age of the individual, we would meet with that client and decide what they are interested in learning. And then we would decide which sessions and which topics are of interest to them. And then we would be able to offer the sessions in the order that they're presented. So if I'm meeting with a family and they say, we have 8 sessions that we would like to do, we want to focus on just the first 8 sessions, then I'll just do those in order. Or if they say we want to talk about how do you trade information, enter and exit a conversation, and then work on the 4 dating topics, then that would be the way we would do it. But the families can decide what they want to cover during the individual sessions. And we can meet with someone once, or we can meet with someone 50 times. It's really up to the family what they feel is best for them. And then I also saw that people would like to know if they can have a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, you're welcome to. What I'll do is I'll put my email address in the chat box. Feel free to email me and I will send you a copy of this. And then I'd also be happy to set up a time to talk with you if you have any more personal or individual questions. All right. If no one else has any questions, then I will let you guys go. But thank you for joining me this afternoon, and I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
If you guys would like to hang out for the last 9 minutes or so and jump into another group, just join me in the main room and I can reassign you. If not, y'all have a great afternoon, and hopefully I will see some of you guys tomorrow.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
I will stick around for a couple extra minutes. I did put my email address in there, so if you want to ask me any individual questions, I will be happy to stick around for a couple minutes. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to meet you guys.
You too.